So next we have Christine Simmonds-Moore, who is from the University of West Georgia, and Christine's going to be talking to us about testing for individual differences in anomalous interactions with objects, psychometry. Thank you very much, Christine.
Thank you. Good morning, stroke afternoon, everybody. Going to be describing a study that we are getting ready to conduct. I was hoping to actually present data today, but it's taking a while, and I'll explain why as I go through. But it's part of a bigger study that we're doing at the University of West Georgia on the topic of psychometry. So I'll start by giving a little definition of that. I have to go quite fast because it's a research brief. But really we're interested in individual differences in the experiences of psychometry and also in performance at a psi task that's got a psychometry design to it. So we're interested in the correlates and nature of psychometry. So if anybody was at my online presentation last year, this may seem familiar. And if anyone's into Lord of the Rings, this may seem familiar as well. It is the One Ring on the slide. And we've been joking about the One Ring throughout the study because the One Ring has consciousness associated with it. And we've even referred to our senders as ring bearers. So we've been joking about this all the way through. So psychometry essentially refers to anomalous interactions with physical objects. And there's lots of definitions out there, but I've sampled Bill Roll's definition today. So he defines psychometry as the practice of using an object from a person, such as a piece of jewellery or clothing, to obtain information about the person. So this definition is neutral, actually, as to whether the person is living or deceased, but oftentimes psychometry is often experienced in the context of people who have already passed away, and so objects might be associated with information about deceased individuals or people who may have lived in a particular location. If you start thinking about psychometry and getting into the literature, you realise that a lot of haunting type experiences and place memories are psychometry-like, because the idea there is that there might be information that at least seems to be associated with physical locations and perhaps objects or places within rooms. And so it's also associated with the experience of using token objects, and that came up, I think, just now in Gerhard's talk about the idea that a psychic can sometimes hold an object and use that object to connect with psychic information. So it's a similar kind of thing. It facilitates psi, and you might see that being used in the context of psychic detectives, perhaps. Okay. I'm going to zip through prior research very quickly because I want to actually talk to you about the study, and I only have 10 minutes. So a lot of the work on psychometry was happening earlier on in the history of psychical research and parapsychology. So there's quite a few early studies on psychometry, mostly focusing on the claims of mediums or people who are self-claimed sensitives who said that they could do this. And again, the focus oftentimes was on accessing information associated with people who are no longer living, but objects associated with those people remain in the world. So I've got a few citations up there. Barrington has a really nice entry in the Psi Encyclopedia on this, Mary Rose Barrington. So if you want to read about this in a succinct way, that's a good place to go. I've been submerging myself in this literature, and really it is quite old, and there's not a lot of more recent work on it. But the early work is really focusing on psychic claims, and it's proof-oriented. It's looking at the idea of testing whether psychics can actually do this. So one example that I've got in my little abstract is about Eileen Garrett, who did a study coordinated by LeShan, and she was found to be able to accurately access information about a person who had donated some objects that were in boxes. And that's one example of the way in which this has been done. So the objects are provided without providing any information about the person, and the psychic or medium is asked to generate information associated with the person who owns or has worn or owned the object. So a lot of the early research does suggest that there is something going on here in terms of special claimants, but there's very little research that's actually focused on these experiences in the general public. So oftentimes it's about the claim and intention to do psychometry, but we were interested in how this might be happening in members of the general public, and in particular, how individual differences might relate. And so that's the focus of my work. So there's been a few studies lately. So there were some done in Argentina by Para's lab, but one recent study as well performed in the UK by Baker and colleagues. And in that study, I think the people in the general public who were psychic claimants did worse than the control group. But it's something that's quite interesting and certainly needs further study. Jumping now to one of the individual differences that I've become really interested in, and I talked about this last year as well. We did a survey looking at individual differences in psychometry experiences and also how that related to exceptional experiences. So ASMR is interesting for many reasons. It's something that maybe all of you experience to a certain extent. It does seem to be a tendency that's distributed on a continuum rather than being something that we either experience or don't experience, so like a lot of other types of sensory experience. But it's autonomous sensory meridian response, ASMR, and it's all over the internet. There's numerous YouTube videos where people are trying to create this experience in others, which I find fascinating. But it's something that people experience in their lives as a sort of response to a range of triggers. And so the questionnaires that are designed to measure this will ask the intensity of your response to a variety of triggers that are oftentimes auditory and sometimes psychosocial. So, for example, whispering is quite a common trigger for ASMR experiences. So yeah, in everyday language, it's the head tingles. It does seem to be related to some interesting other variables that I've also looked at, and I will show you some of those correlates on this slide. So I talked a lot about anomaly-proneness, a term that can be developed and should be developed perhaps, but it does seem to be promising as a variable that might be associated with anomalous experiences, and I can tell you that we did find that it relates to subjective paranormal experiences and wider exceptional experiences in our survey. And that's what I talked about last year. So it is promising. It's got these kind of tendencies of being interconnected and sensitive, just like other variables like transliminality, like synesthesia, like openness to experience, and also empathy. And we thought that this was interesting in terms of psi, having all these features. It also seems to be quite similar to sensory processing sensitivity, and I was just asking Liz about how this might relate to that, so I don't know. It's quite interesting. But it does seem to be associated with this enhanced connectivity. Interestingly as well, one study found that ASMR is associated with greater connectivity between areas of the brain, and this study was looking at the default mode network, so I think that's interesting as well. So very, very sensitive personality type that's kind of prone to interpersonal, emotional experiences in particular. So I think, could that also include psi? So, I know I don't have much time. It does seem to be associated with reduced ability to inhibit sensory, emotional experiences. And these authors suggested this is suppressed in most people. So I wonder, could this also include psi? This aligns with other ideas in the other anomaly-prone personality types. And I think it's interesting that it does relate to synesthesia. It could do something similar. ASMR is something that is much more common than synesthesia. And one reason for looking at this is that it's sort of a synesthesia-like experience that is much more common. So we might be more likely to find participants who fit the bill. And so it could be, like synesthesia, bringing lots of information together, emotional information, perhaps including non-local information, and drawing it into consciousness. So I think that's interesting. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm moving forward. This is just the results of our previous study. Short summary of this slide. Yes, ASMR relates to exceptional experiences, in particular psychometry for our interests. Synesthesia was also found to relate to psychometry, so both those things are interesting for our psi study. So in our study that we are working on, we're looking to see whether we have actual side effects in a psychometry design amongst members of the general public. And people have already filled out the survey, and we were originally planning to invite people who filled out our survey to come in and participate in the lab study. However, the survey went viral and went all around the world, and so we only had 3 people who were local to Carrollton, Georgia, who were either high or low ASMR experiences, so that's one of the things that's held us up. But we are looking to see, when we get enough people, whether we have above chance effects in the study, so targets being identified more than decoys. And targets are rings that have been worn by 5 volunteers for a 4-week period. And the decoys are control rings that look identical and were bought at the same time as the target rings. So we're looking to see overall if there's an effect, and we're also looking to see whether people who are high scorers on ASMR can identify targets better than decoys overall. We're also looking at synesthesia, if people self-identify, but that's a kind of secondary question for this one. We're mostly focusing on ASMR. We're also looking at types of material, and this is more exploratory. And so we've got 5 different types of material for the rings, and we're just wondering, do some types of physical material work better in the target system than others, and do certain personality types amongst the senders relate more strongly to information being correlated with these objects. So that's more exploratory. So I know I'm really probably out of time, so I'm going to just show you the 5 objects, 5 materials, I should say. And this is another thing that's held us up, because control rings that have been in boxes don't look the same as rings that have been worn around a neck on a necklace for 4 or 5 weeks. So we've had to be doing some investigations into chemistry to try and age our rings. So that's also held us up with the study, and is a reason why I do not have data for you today. But this is what we are doing. And I think, it's the next slide. I'll just show you this. That's how things are going to be set up in our little lab. We have a Lazy Susan. We have the 5 pairs of rings arranged in locations around this Lazy Susan, and we're just asking our participants to come in and interact with the rings. They're randomly arranged in position A or B, and the experimenter that's running the trials will be blind to what the positions are of targets and decoys. And participants are asked to rate how much they think each ring is the target, and then decide whether ring A or B is the target for each of the 5 positions. And I know I'm probably over time, so I'll stop. Do I have any time for questions or no?
You do, yes.
I do.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much.
Sorry, it's short.
And yes, we do have time for a couple of questions, if anybody has any. Oh. Okay.
Sorry if I missed it. So are they just picking between one or the other for a target, or are they actually trying to get information from the...
Yeah, I rushed over that bit because it is short. Yeah, they're doing both. It's in a Qualtrics format, and so we play with it, and it's taking a long time to get it ironed out how to run it. But what we've got is we're asking them to look at ring A first. We ask them to pick it up, and they have a space on the Qualtrics form to write any impressions, and we're just trying to say, don't force anything and just put what you experienced, and it's okay to put nothing. So there's a space, and then there's the rating, and then they go to B and do the same. Yeah, sorry, I rushed over that.
No? Any more questions? No?
I'm just wondering if you looked into storing different kind of information into the objects in a process of consecration, or people who have that kind of abilities to maybe pass on the message through the object.
That might be a future study. That's really interesting. I think we're looking at correlation at the moment. So we asked our senders to fill out personality questionnaires. So we're interested in transliminality and basically neuroticism. And they were asked to keep a diary of as to what was going on in terms of emotion. So I suppose we're trying to sort of get at it that way. If they're having more emotional experiences, that might do something in terms of information correlation. But yeah, maybe a future study will actually try to infuse information into objects or correlate information with objects. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any more questions? No? Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Christine.